Well, look what I have. I finally got tired of using solder wick and decided that I really just needed a desoldering station. So I splurged. Now this is not an expensive desoldering station. In fact, it is the cheapest desoldering station you can get. It's the ZD-915, or for those of you from Canada and the UK, the ZD-915. This cost about 120 US dollars, and I've heard good things about it, so I hope that it lives up to its reputation. Let's take a quick look at what we've got here. We've got the main unit. We've got buttons for up and down for temperature, and they seem to be pretty good buttons. A button here to switch between Celsius and Fahrenheit, power button, and then a couple of connectors here for the desoldering gun. We've got a holder here that conveniently sits right on the side of the unit. Power cord. Some little pokey things to clean out the tips. And it also comes with two other tips of different sizes and some extra filters. Now this is a little attachment that is used to put the gun on, and it even says it's a desoldering gun. That's so nice. I never would have figured that out. So let's go ahead and get this hooked up. Like I said, I've never used one of these before, so this is going to be a learning experience for me. Alright, so this part simply screws in here. Just need to make sure we get it lined up correctly. It only goes in one way, it's notched. And then this is the hose. Trying to make sure I'm not creating knots here. Now this piece has a little rubber gasket inside it. This is going to screw on here. There's already, you can see, a filter in there. Screw that on, just hand tight. Push this on. This is the vacuum line. And we'll turn on the power. There's a fan in here you can hear running in the back. It says heat on weight. And right now it's set at 160 degrees Celsius. From what I understand, somewhere in the realm of 380 to 400 is a good place to start. You can see it heating up there. It tells you what the current temperature is and what it's set at. Let's move this. We'll start at 400. I believe this goes as high as 480. And in Fahrenheit, that's what, 752? And one thing to note is on the tip of the gun, there is a bit of a solder plug in the end of the tip. So when it gets to temperature, it'll probably smoke a little bit. Yeah, it's smoking now. I'm not sure if you can see that on camera. And then you'll have to press the button to suck that solder in, and it'll go in here to the little glass capture tube. But that's got to be sucked out before we use it. So we're at 330. Okay, at 400, see it stopped counting. And we'll suck up that solder tip. Seems to work pretty well. This tip is cleared. Okay, now I'm going to push this off to the side and I'm going to get a board out here to work on. Alright, this is the board out of a bread bin 64, assembly number 250407. Now this board actually works perfectly well. It does still need to be recapped. I haven't done that yet. But I've got a 64C that I'm working on, and I think it's got a bad processor. So the 8500 processor that's in the 64C can be swapped with the 6510. So I'm going to pull the 6510 out of here, stick it in the 64C's socket, and see if the processor actually is the problem. But you can see on this board, the 6510 is not socketed. So we've got to desolder it. So here's the first test. Let's see how this goes. Now, I've never done this before, so it's possible that I might do something terribly, terribly wrong. Wow, that worked perfect. And that second one didn't do anything. Okay. Yeah, I think I just wasn't holding it on there quite right. Let's go to the third pin. Yeah, I think I was trying to suck the solder off before it was fully liquid. So there's a little learning curve. But only a few seconds. This is actually working really, really well. I think I'm trying to suck it up too fast because I don't want to leave the tip on the board too long because I'm afraid of damaging the board, but maybe I don't need to be. Tell you what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to turn this off. I don't know if you can see. Try shining a light up from below. I don't think you can really see there. But it did a really good job of sucking the solder out. But I think maybe the tip is too big. I think the hole in the tip might be too big. So I'm going to get out one of the other tips here that has a smaller hole in it. These don't seem to be marked anywhere as to the size. You just kind of eyeball it. But I think this one is a little smaller than the one that's in here. You can't really tell because of the solder plug, but I think it's a little smaller. So to get this off, you just unscrew the tip. And I'm being really careful here because this thing is still hot. That's why I'm using a pair of channel locks instead of my fingers. All right, so we've got this little shaft that comes off. Here's our tip. Put the new one on. Doesn't have to be super tight, just kind of snug it up. Turn the power back on. You can't see it here without me moving the camera, but it kept the 400°C setting. So that's nice to know I don't have to reset it every time. Alright, we're back up to 400 degrees. Suck in the solder plug. Which hasn't completely melted yet. Okay, so right off the bat with this thing, run into a little bit of trouble. This is the smallest tip, and the solder plug that's in there is not melting. I've got the unit set up to 480°C right now, and it's still plugged. And see, I can't even get the little cleaner in there. What I'm trying next is I've got my regular soldering iron heating up with a very long pointy tip. So I'm going to see if I can't get that on there and melt this solder plug enough for this thing to work. If not, I've read some reviews online where a couple of people said that they actually had to drill it out, which seemed at the time like a really stupid thing to have to do. But I'm starting to understand why they had to drill it out, because it's at full temperature here, it's as high as it goes at 480°C, and the solder plug isn't melting. Okay, so here's my soldering iron with the needle tip. Stick that in there. And it's still not melting. I don't think this is the fault of the unit itself. I think it's just the solder plug that's in this tip. Because the one that was in the other one melted just fine. It melted very quickly and wasn't a problem at all. This one, on the other hand, just makes me wonder if they used a type of solder on some of these that was actually higher than the gun was designed for. Alright, looking in the manual for this, such as it is, it's rather interesting. It says here, after use, the solder waste will be stored in the pipe. If you do not clean it in time, the solder waste will block the desoldering gun. This is because when under high temperature, the solder waste will get oxidated. Lead-free solder's melting point is 220 degrees Celsius. Non-lead-free solder's melting point is 180 degrees Celsius. Get swelled and stuck on the inner wall tightly. You cannot remove it even with the cleaning pin. Well, gee, geniuses, you think you should have thought of that before you put a solder plug in it at the factory. Okay, so I got the tip cleaned out. It took a bit of drilling from behind and tapping a nail in the tip to get it to pop out, but it's clear. I've got the temperature now set to 425. And it seems to work okay. It takes a second to melt the solder in a lot of cases, but it seems to work fine. Okay, so the chip is out. It actually worked pretty well. There definitely was a bit of a learning curve to it. One of the problems was the ends of the pins had been bent over a little bit on the underside of the board. So I had to kind of come in at an angle and then go up to get to be able to get suction on it to suck it out. That's not really the fault of the desoldering station. That's just a quirk of the way that the board was assembled. After several pins, it did need to be cleaned again with the little cleaning poker here. It's got a, I don't know if you can see this, but it's got a rough end on it here, almost like a file. And that had to be cleaned out again, but I only had to do it once. So it's probably just a little bit of excess left over of the original solder plug. So I have to say, pretty pleased with it given the price point.